Hey everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to episode 52 of Stir Crazy, our unscripted, unfiltered offering here from the Real News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Today is First Nation Friday, where the last time we had an all-Indigenous panel, it was very well received by the audience. So of course we had to do it again. So today's Stir Crazy is going to be focusing on our Native American sisters and brothers, because they go through plenty of shit too here in the United States. And while we are screaming out Black Lives Matter, we need to be screaming out also Indigenous Lives Matter also, okay? Because for reasons, lots of reasons. Because we are a little bit behind coming to you live, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our fantastic panel. All three of these ladies have joined us before, and we are so excited to have them back with us. We are joined today with journalist, organizer, and founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism, Jen Deerenwater. Miwok journalist and community organizer Desiree Kane is joining us, and journalist and community builder Johnny J. Ladies, welcome back to Stir Crazy. I'm very excited to have you all here again, and thank y'all for being here on First Nation Friday.
Yeah, thanks for having us back.
So I kind of feel like, so when researching for today, I mean, there's a lot of stories that are impacting Indian country nationwide. And first and foremost, the dismantling of symbols of colonialism. Now, everyone who was watching Stir Crazy yesterday, yeah, we played this video yesterday, but damn if it ain't a good song. Let's hit it, baby. Minnesota, the state capital, members of the American Indian movement taking a rope and bringing Christopher Columbus' sorry ass down into the street. Let's see it. So when researching for today, I mean, there's a lot of stories that are impacting Indian country nationwide. And first and foremost,
Now, tomorrow we'll be able to say we are still here, but he's gone. Yeah.
Just an amazing sight there at the Minnesota State Capitol. That video shot by Max Nastarak. Ladies, I'm gonna go around the horn and get your reaction to these symbols of colonialism coming down, specifically Christopher Columbus, as it impacts the First Nations people. Jen, when you see Columbus being beheaded in places like Boston and then brought down and stomped out in the street like the bitch ass that he was, how does that make you feel? What's your reaction to that?
It makes me feel good. You know, and in terms of like some of these statues that have come down, I lived in Boston for about 10 years. So I have been past that Christopher Columbus statue many times. Boston is probably by far one of the most racist cities I've ever lived in. They really do love their colonialism up there. So seeing him beheaded is great. I guess I get worried though, because Boston Mayor Marty Walsh has made this like BS white supremacist, in my opinion, based idea that, well, we're going to talk about whether or not we'll repair the statue and put it back up. And it's like, no, just take it down. Stop putting the damn thing back up, But yeah, I'm excited to see these things coming down. Columbus was garbage, and the fact that he is still celebrated to this day is disgraceful and shameful.
Johnny J, did your heart sing when you saw Columbus statue come down or in cities across the nation?
Oh, it absolutely did. Seeing all the statues coming down really was just such a satisfying start to my day yesterday. Mainly because, for natives, a lot of them have gone the legal route to have these statues removed. There's been petitions, there's been meetings with city councils, with governors, to try and get these statues taken down and to also, remind people of the real history behind these figures that are being immortalized in these statues that really should not be immortalized because of the crimes against humanity that they committed. Especially Christopher Columbus, it's such a historical fallacy that he discovered this land and that he was just a discoverer when he was a genocidal maniac. He had a diary that he kept, that kind of laid out the horrendous atrocities that he committed. And yet still to this day, people are like, no, I don't think that's what he was doing. It wasn't actual genocide. It wasn't actual slavery. He didn't actually do this. He was a discoverer. He was a great man. And you're looking like, he's got a diary. Like, he wrote this stuff down in his own words. There's also records from other people that were alive during that time that also kind of testified that this was a man that was horrendous. And so to see these statues coming down for me is just so satisfying because it's about time. We live in a country where they talk about what a travesty it is that people want to re-envision history. But yet it's not re-envisioning history. It's not revising history. It's actually bringing to light the actual history that occurred and righting the wrongs that have been done in erasing that actual history and putting up these tropes just to hold up that idea of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, it's so tragic when people are defending a whitewashed, sanitized, falsified history. It's like y'all are mad because people are telling you the truth and you don't even recognize it as truth because you were instructed on a lie about who this man was and what he represented. And Desiree, tell us about what is potentially happening at the California State Capitol in Sacramento in regards to the Columbus statue.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for having us on. What's happening in California right now is an extension of what Indigenous people from the area, myself included, have been calling for a number of years, which is to remove out of the California Capitol Rotunda the Columbus statue that sits in the very center, glorified in its bizarre way that white supremacy is glorified in America, in the United States specifically. So that's what's happening. I am so happy to see all of these statues just completely in the lake, in the fountain. Some of them, the face was burned off. I think it's righteous because for a really long time, those kinds of exaltations of white supremacy, of Columbus, of this American capitalist society, when it stares you in the face for so long, it reminds you how othered you are as a Native person, that you are forcibly subjugated under colonialism, that we are all not willing participants in capitalism. So when I see those things being removed and not put in a museum, just completely destroyed, I think that it's sacred rage that a lot of folks are beginning to understand if they're not from Black or Indigenous communities. So the white communities of the United States are starting to say, oh my gosh, geez, we should get rid of this. It does feel like there's a sense of empathy that's coming along with awakening that we can thank the Black Lives Matter movement for in this moment. So it's happening in California. Folks are starting up in Colorado. I think it's wonderful and much needed because we're finally starting to teach the truth about what has gone on this continent instead of just have this veil over our collective eyes where we're teaching the kids, frankly, lies about history, or we're not teaching the youth about actual history. And so this public discourse with these statues coming down it's a win for us all.
Yeah, and it's so strange to see people like we were discussing before we went live, like New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, defend Christopher Columbus's, legacy still to this day. And a lot of Italian Americans, I won't even say a lot, some Italian Americans, I have no idea how many Italian Americans revere Christopher Columbus, but my goodness, y'all, when Frank Sinatra and Robert De Niro still on the planet, y'all can make up some new Italian American statues. There are way better Italians than Christopher Columbus. Trust me. Don't fret over Columbus coming down. There's better folks to make statues of. Ladies, I wanted to discuss something that has been impacting the nation, but having a disproportionate impact in Indian country and amongst the Black community as well. And of course, that is the COVID-19 pandemic. Just for example, in Navajo Nation, there are over 6,100 confirmed cases of COVID, I believe 277 deaths. But I read this piece in Politico, which shocked the shit out of me, which I totally was not expecting. And it turns out that the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, does not share COVID information with the tribes. And that is absolutely stunning to me, considering that Native Americans are amongst the vulnerable populations that are being exposed and suffering with the effects of COVID more so than mainstream America, white America, let me put it that way. And the sort of galling way that this health data is being withheld from tribes is something I'm ashamed to say it took me aback, although it probably should not. Johnny, can you talk about what and why this is?
For me, I see it just as another process and the ongoing genocide against Native people, because it's denying us the information that we need to protect our communities during a pandemic where we are being disproportionately affected. They're denying us the right to learn about how to contact tracing within our communities, also, sharing the rate of how this is spread, and also, really just getting a look at the numbers, which also makes me want to, I guess it really makes me wonder, that they're so adamant about not sharing this information, how much information they actually have or even attempted to keep on Native country. And maybe that's one of the reasons. But, the other reason that I've seen time and time again when it comes to tribal nations being denied information, a lot of it is because they oftentimes question our legitimacy as sovereign nations. And mainly because they don't understand what sovereign nations are. They don't understand Indian law. They don't understand that, we are a nation within a nation. And so, when you're looking at the CDC denying tribes the information regarding COVID, they're citing privacy concerns. They're citing, do tribes legally have a right to this information? And in denying us that information, they are putting us at further risk. And to me, it's just an ongoing process. And it's something that we see time and time and time again. It's nothing new. But, this time, during the middle of a pandemic, when, we have, just not the resources that we need, when we're lacking the funding, when, we're being hit really hard right now. Even in other states beyond the Navajo Nation, we're starting to see a rise in numbers. So this information is really important for us right now. And the fact that we're being denied, it really pisses me off because, we're less than 2% of the population. And this, with every death, I mentioned this in a previous episode, with every death, it has a tremendous impact on our communities. And, I think that right now with the funding being withheld and that we're having to jump through so many hoops and being denied this information. It's just really making it clear that this is just, the U.S. continuing the tradition of Native genocide, of trying to eradicate the Indian problem here in America.
Ladies, let me read from the Politico article, and then Desiree and Jen, I'm going to give you a chance to hop in and respond. From Politico, it says Native American organizations have repeatedly run into roadblocks trying to get data from federal officials over the past month. The CDC has denied a series of requests from the nation's 12 tribal epidemiology centers for raw access, for raw coronavirus data, even though state health departments are allowed to freely access this information. The tribal epidemiology centers were originally created to coordinate public health efforts between the tribes and state and federal agencies. And under the Affordable Care Act, the centers are considered public health authorities on par with state health departments and federal agencies such as the CDC. So why is the CDC faking on this information, Desiree?
I think it's important to understand that tribes are sovereign nations. And I think that, and this is just speculation because I haven't read that exact article, but you have to remember the United States is an occupying force. And there are many, many, many sovereign nations that exist on this land as sovereign nations. So the unwillingness to work with tribal nations who are sovereign, who have their own health departments, have their own virologists and things like that. It's part of what Johnny was just saying about it being an ongoing process of genocide, right? So in this case, the violence is actually not giving information. And the whole point is to make the sovereign nation a dependent sovereign nation on the United States. So there's a power position that the United States has where it's subjugating tribes by making them dependent on the data. This is something that has gone on even prior to COVID-19. There's a missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. There's thousands and thousands of folks missing or murdered. And the data around that is also not available. People are mislabeled. This is the system, again, working as it should, but in the minds of, I guess, the United States, that's how it should work. But what it's doing is subjugating tribal nations and tribal people. So it's incredibly violent to withhold that sort of information, especially when we're dealing with a virus that is taking so many lives and is affecting such vulnerable folks who are living lowly and otherwise.
Jen, what is the withholding of this information? What does that do to people who are living in tribal areas, and even for Native Americans who aren't living in tribal areas? If you're not able to necessarily figure out how this virus is impacting this particular population, what kind of issues does that raise?
So I think in particular, I'll say that I think the CDC not releasing this data is just, I'm going to echo Johnny and Desiree, as this is just an ongoing process of genocide. I think it's particularly important for our more urban-based natives, or at least natives living outside of tribal lands, because then quite often we don't have any sort of native health care. So we have to hope that our data is being accurately collected by these non-native health centers and medical professionals. And that's where the CDC not releasing this data is one of the many ways it's really problematic. If we don't know who's getting sick and we don't know why, then we can't possibly fix the problem. I worked in politics for years, and one of the things that every legislator is going to ask for when you come to them and say, hey, here's a problem, how do we fix it? They're going to say, where's the data? And if you don't have data or you have inaccurate data, you're not going to get funding. You're not going to get help. But this is just one more issue that, Indian country has had with the CDC since COVID-19, really hit us hard. There were two different payments of $40 million that were allocated for Indian health services, tribal-run health centers, and for urban Indian health centers. Well, it was given to the CDC to distribute to these health facilities, and then they sat on it for ages. They said, oh, we don't know how to distribute this. We don't know what we're supposed to do. And this is a problem I think we have across the board, regardless of what issue we're talking about with the federal government, is that because we are so tied to them, there's this constant problem of having to deal with multiple agencies, none of whom ever seem to know anything about us, have any understanding of us, any understanding of American law when it comes to tribes. So for me, it's just, it's just another problem that we have. But something that I think is particularly infuriating and insulting is to have the CDC say, oh, well, this is personal private data. Meanwhile, back in April, the federal government released personal private data on tribal nations and tribal citizens. And so it's like, well, we just had a leak of our information by the federal government. And you have the audacity to tell us that we can't maintain privacy? Like, just get out of here with that.
Speaking of the federal government slow walking money to natives, $8 billion was allocated out of the CARES Act, which passed at the end of March, I believe, specifically going to Native American tribes. And the Trump administration has been sued because of either underpaying what Congress had passed to tribes, because all of this money has not yet been dispersed. And there is something to the tune of over $600 million that has been held back. Secretary of Treasury Steven Mnuchin this week promised that this money would be dispersed, I think today, and I don't think that it has yet happened. I guess this goes back to the point that you all raised with Native tribes being so closely linked to the federal government. Let me just ask, is this typical from a presidential administration to have money that has already been congressionally set aside and allocated for native tribes, but the money not be dispersed, I guess, as Jen just detailed? Jen, let me kick this one back to you.
I'm going to start by saying I don't know if other administrations have done something like this. It would not shock me if they had. I mean, we natives know, Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, whatever, they're never on our side. So I wouldn't be surprised. But I mean, part of the issue with this is, one, $8 billion is nowhere near enough to help us. Tribal leaders have said that we need about $10 billion just to get Indian health services up to par where it should be compared to other health centers. So $8 billion is a drop in the bucket. That's nothing. But then Trump didn't want it all to actually go to the tribal governments. He wanted some of it, a pretty large amount, to go to Alaskan Native corporations. Well, this money is not for corporations, it's for tribes. And there is a big difference between a corporation and a tribal government. And for me, it's just another way of saying, oh, look, we helped you poor little downtrodden Indians. But then in reality, the government doesn't actually do anything, and they do that just to let us die. I mean, if you look at the Urban Indian Health Institute based in Seattle, they put a call out for COVID tests and supplies and things, and instead they got body bags and toe tags. Like, it's like the Childish Gambino song. I've been saying this since the George Floyd protests. I'm like, this is America. This is what it's always been, and it's not going to change unless we tear this system down and get rid of it.
Yeah, there's a lot happening here because the Trump administration was sued about this by the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, and they sued Steven Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary specifically. So the Trump administration apparently was withholding back 24%, over $600 million of this designated $8 billion for tribes because of this lawsuit. And the judge ruled that it was patently unfair, is what the judge said, for other tribes to be made to wait while things are resolved with this particular lawsuit with the Prairie Band Potawatomi. Desiree, the divide and conquer tactic is something that the U.S. government is infamous for, especially when it comes to dealing with natives. But in the same way, we're talking about a pandemic here, and this money is urgently needed in places where the virus is impacting people the most.
Mm-hmm. And there's historical precedent for leaving natives out, right? I can share a personal story from my family. So my tribe is Miwok. We're out of California, like around the Sacramento area. If you go back, so my point is the pandemic of COVID-19, yes, but the pandemic of colonialism and capitalism is rife in this situation. So if you go back into my family documentation, you can see where the Bureau of Indian Affairs found a group of our elders that were out living on a hill in our territory. And they did an assessment for healthcare, for food needs, things like that. What they decided was, instead of offering care, because the children were all taken to boarding school, the men were all working in agriculture because that's what happened. It was easier for us to assimilate into agriculture. They chose to leave our elders on the hill, basically to just pass away. And that feels sneakily, suspiciously a lot like what's happening now is actually negligence and leaving people out to die. So what Trump is doing with the pandemic of COVID-19 is in line 100% with the colonialist approach of leaving Native people out to die, to be left behind. You know, the saying goes like, let the dead bury the dead. And it's not right, you know, but I do think that we have to understand that this is not new. And when you look at what the United States is doing with the Black community or the Native community or in between Black and Native community, they will intentionally pit us apart and say that, you know, there's misinformation campaigns, there's all sorts of things that stop us from achieving unity as people under colonialism, as quote unquote colonized people. They will always do their best to send infiltrators and operatives in to stir up discontent between groups so that we can never truly rise up. And in this moment, you know, my relatives are out in the street with Natives for Black Power signs. My elders are at rallies, you know, being there in solidarity because we understand the historical precedent set to pit us apart, but also that we've learned something and we're not going to succumb to that. We're not here to compete because the issue is colonialism. It's not one another. There's a concept that the US government even uses with Native people called blood quantum, which is where they track our blood like cattle and dogs. And so understanding the ways in which the US government does divide and conquer us, there's a lot to study and there's a lot to learn. But as we think about how are we going to get through this moment as a group of people, as tribes, as community, multiple communities, looking at their playbook, it's all there. Just read history and look at, you know, the ways that movements have been infiltrated and broken apart. I was at Standing Rock where that happened a lot, and they're doing it now, and you can see it. So just being mindful, I guess, is my point. But that
hold on, Desiree. I'm sorry, dear. I don't mean to cut you off. I want to go back. What did you say that thing was? You said blood what?
Blood quantum. You know how you track the pedigree of a horse? Or like dogs?
Yes.
Yeah, they do it with us. I have a piece of paper that says like my blood quantum and who my mother is and my tribe. What? And like, it's a piece of paper from the US government that has my breed in it.
What is the supposed purpose of this practice?
It's to eradicate Native people on paper. It has no scientific basis. It has nothing to do with our actual DNA or the quantity of Native blood. It's just a fraction that was assigned to our ancestors. And the whole system was designed to reduce with each generation so that in time, on paper, there would be no natives left.
What the fuck?
It's to kind of support this idea that Native people could be bred out of existence. And it's something that, all tribes have had to adopt as part of our sovereignty. And, as we've grown, a lot of tribes have stopped using blood quantum as means of determining tribal citizenship and belonging within the tribe. But there are a lot of other tribes that still use blood quantum to determine tribal citizenship. And a large part of that is because there's so many people nowadays that claim to be Native, especially with a lot of the ancestry tests, that tell people like they're like 3%, 10% Native. It doesn't give them a try because there is no DNA test that can determine that. But, in a way, blood quantum has kind of become a means of protection to try and keep pretendians from infiltrating our tribes and claiming citizenship. And it's a really crappy system. It has no basis. And it is something that we do need to start discussing and finding ways to move away from it because, it's so ridiculous because so many people believe that there are no full-blood natives left. I was actually scrolling Facebook the other morning because I was up and bored, and I saw a comment in a group where they were talking about blood quantum. And there were so many people that were talking about getting their DNA test back. And they were like, oh, the reason that, this DNA test says that I'm not Native, even though, we have stories in my family, is because there's white Europeans bred with natives so much that there is no basis for Native American blood. So your DNA test will now say you're not Native. And it's just because there's no sample of Native blood. And I'm looking at that comment like, what in the world? But it all goes back to this idea of blood quantum because it was a system that was just designed to support this idea that we could be bred out of existence, which is historically why Native women were specifically targeted with sexual violence. It's why Native women were raped and why they were sold into forced marriages, because a lot of people did believe that they could literally screw the Native out of us, if nothing else. And so, blood quantum plays a huge role in that. And it's something that we have to really struggle against because, there's a lot of Natives who are belonging. They know their family, they know their history, they grow up within their tribes, but yet because of blood quantum, they are not considered tribal citizens and therefore don't have the legal rights that a lot of enrolled citizens do. So it's a huge discussion. It's a huge debate within Indian country, especially now, on whether or not, we do away with blood quantum. And if we do, what do we move towards? A lot of tribes like the Choctaw and the Cherokee, they now use lineage and descendanship for citizenship. So as long as you can prove that you are descendant from a tribal member, then you can seek citizenship yourself. But for the most part, a lot of tribes still do depend on blood quantum.
You just blew my mind, guys. I just learned something that I had never known before. And of course, the first person that popped into my head, especially after Johnny said pretendians, was Elizabeth Warren and her, I'm 132nd, Cherokee Indian. It's like, lady, come on. Jen, I'll let you weigh in on this because, I've never heard of this. Blood quantum. This is fascinating.
Yeah, so the only living beings in the United States that have to register our blood quantum are dogs, horses, and natives. My blood quantum is registered with the American federal government. My tribe, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, we don't use blood quantum to determine citizenship. We instead use the Dawes rolls. If you had an ancestor on the Dawes rolls, you can get tribal citizenship. And I think in particular, speaking to the piece about like sexual violence, like this was a thing that happened to a lot of Cherokee women. We were just raped over and over and over again for generations by white men trying to rape the Cherokee out of us. And it is part of why you can have people who are legitimately Cherokee, such as myself, that are, look like this. I've got brown hair, green eyes, and I'm pale as can be. I'm a white coated native. I know that. I own that. And it's a difficult conversation to try to have, because I don't think it's a privilege to have generations of rape within your people. But I also still understand that when I walk through the world, I am not subjected to the same kind of violence that our darker Native relatives are, or other darker BIPOC folks. But blood quantum, it's really kind of the reverse of the one drop rule. The one drop rule was really meant to make more slaves. Blood quantum is meant to kill natives off. And if you look also at the history, my people, we may be in Oklahoma now, but we're a Southeastern tribe. Part of the root of anti-Blackness within some Native tribes, including mine, is partially tied to blood quantum. Like, there were some laws put into effect under different colonizing nations, not all the United States, because we have to remember we had all kinds of white people coming over here long before the U.S. existed. But they put, laws into place and said, well, your tribe can marry white people, but you cannot marry Black people. If you marry Black people, we're not going to consider you Native anymore, and we're going to take your land.
Yikes.
Yeah. So that's a tool of a divide and conquer. It just pits Native and Black folks against each other. I mean, and I think it was also a way of the federal government trying to make sure that not only that we didn't come together to fight together and stand against the government, but I think it was also a way of trying to keep Black folks from having a land base, just like it was a way to keep Native people from having a land base. They thought, well, if you just keep marrying white people, you won't be Native anymore, and then we don't have to deal with these tribes anymore. The Indian problem has been solved, so to speak.
This is such a disgusting piece of history that I'm glad that y'all gave us some information about this, but my God, that is fucked up.
It gets weirder and grosser. It's eugenics. Like, they were forcibly sterilizing Indigenous women into like the late 70s. Forcibly sterilizing against their will, because a lot of our tribes are matrilineal.
Yeah. And then because of issues of intermarriage, whether it's by choice, force, or possibly just feeling a sense of shame in the idea of being with your own people. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I lost my train of thought.
Okay. It's okay.
It's been a long few weeks.
I can imagine. And, I think it was Desiree who mentioned earlier, and really all three of you have brought it up at various points in time, about the level of continual sexual violence and violence, period, that have been leveled against Native women for generations, hundreds of years now. But speaking in modern day terms, there are so many Native women who go missing, who are murdered, and their murders are not solved. Their killers are never brought to justice. There was a bill that passed the California Assembly earlier this week unanimously. It was brought forth by Assemblyman Ramos. I can't remember his first name. James C. Ramos, a Democrat from Highland. He wants to create a greater sharing of information and heightened cooperation between California's Department of Justice, tribal governments, and local law enforcement and tribal justice systems to help find missing women, to a lot more resources to law enforcement and make more cooperation between the state and the tribal governments, to reduce the amount of Native women and girls who go missing and who are murdered every year. I wanted to get y'all's take on this, whether or not this is good enough. Does this address the issue in any way, or is this not really addressing the issue at all? Desiree, since this is in your backyard, I'll start with you.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we do need attention and resources given, but until you deal with those underpinnings of miseducation about Native people, capitalism and the consumption of bodies, consumption in general from the land. It's just so hand in hand and intertwined. This is not even a drop in the bucket. Not even a drop in the bucket.
And mind you, it's not law yet. So it is going to be debated by the Senate, though I'm not sure what the debate is. Johnny, I think you're in California also. I'm not sure if you were familiar with this, but hearing about it just on a cursory level, what is your reaction?
Oh, yeah. Well, like Desiree said, it is a double-edged sword because a lot of things aren't addressed. We don't need more policing, especially because the police play a huge part in the violence towards Indigenous women. Women have been murdered by police. Pregnant women have died in prison. Especially with COVID, that has really brought to light some of that injustice because there was a Native woman who contracted COVID who was pregnant and she died. And, her baby was safe, but, it's like she was moved states away from her family. And, the murdered and missing Indigenous women, it has a really personal impact on me. My aunt is among the murdered and missing. And, I think about the injustice of the legal system. And I look at some of the efforts that they're making to try and remedy this, but they're never addressing the root of the problem, which is the legal system that they're asking us to depend on, to put our trust in. And, we need the information. There are several organizations that have done a tremendous job of gathering the data, tracking the number of women who are murdered and missing, talking with families, trying to get these stories so that we can raise awareness, and also giving support to the families. Because oftentimes, and in my personal experience, when you report a Native woman missing, no one searches. Usually it's the families and the community that have to go out and really put in the groundwork of looking for their loved one. When my aunt was murdered, her kids got a call that her trailer was on fire, and they went there, and they noticed that there were some things off, that her car was dusty, and it was a car that she didn't drive on dirty roads because she didn't want to. It was a new car for her, and she didn't want to ruin the paint job. She didn't want to get it dirty. But they noticed, that it was covered in dirt. They also noticed some blood, and people told them like, well, we didn't find the body. So, maybe she went out with a friend, maybe she's out partying, maybe this. And, they already knew that something was very off about this. And they went home and, not knowing what happened to their mom. And it wasn't until she missed a court date for custody of one of her grandkids that they realized that something was seriously wrong, because she would not have missed that court date. And so they went searching for her, and they went searching the back roads, and somewhere along one of those roads, they started noticing things and seeing items on the side of the road that they knew belonged to her car. One was one of the crocheted Kleenex box holders. And once they started finding items, they called the cops, and they were like, we are starting to find things that we know is our mom's car. And they told them that they needed to leave the scene. And at that point, they did call people to come and search for her. And they found her 50 yards from where my cousins had been searching. And, she was buried in a shallow grave, and she was tortured. She was murdered, and it was horrific. Like, nobody deserved to die that way. But the fact that, my cousins had to go out and search first before anyone else, that's one of the things that hurt the most. And I think that's one of the things that hurts the most in Indian country, is that, our women could go missing, our young girls, our two spirits, even our men and our boys, they could go missing, and no one cares to look except us. And it isn't until they're found, and it isn't until someone picks up on that story, that people start thinking, oh, well, maybe this will generate some interest, or maybe this will help our ad sales. Maybe this will help get us, more traffic on our website, or whatever reason, that people start caring, and they start putting it in the stories, and they sensationalize it. And, so much gets lost in it. And it's so angering because, Native communities are literally telling people like what they can do to help us, and what we need in order to help remedy this problem. And yet everyone kind of gives us Band-Aids. A lot like this bill. They will put this bill out there because, right now the murdered and missing Indigenous women is a topic that has come up in the mainstream. So a lot of people kind of jump on it as a bandwagon issue without really taking the time to understand or really work with Native communities. Even the Trump administration put together a task force with little information from actual Native communities that have really, or organizations that have really done the work. So it is really angering because we do get Band-Aids quite a bit. And it's just, like, oh, we're going to give you just a little bit, just enough to shut you up on this. Just enough to kind of sate the anger a little bit and kind of get us out of hot water. But there's a lot that goes into it. And, with this bill in particular, it is a double-edged sword because, yes, we do need access to data. We do need more cooperation in being able to report our women who are missing and to get people to care enough to search, to look, and for us to get justice. And my aunt's case, her murderer was an ex-boyfriend who happened to be Native. And the swiftness in which he was caught and prosecuted and charged was within a year. And if he wasn't Native, he probably would have walked free because that's what happens. That's the disparity in the legal system. If it's a Native or if it's any BIPOC, we know that we are prosecuted and we're quicker and also for longer sentences than our white counterparts for similar crimes. And it goes back to the same with the murdered missing Indigenous women. White men often walk free. In Alaska, a man was caught and admitted to kidnapping a Native woman, choking her until she was unconscious so that he could get off. He actually, did this just so that he could get off. He choked her. She thought she was dying. He left her on the side of the road. He admitted to this. And yet in court, they found him not guilty. Even with his own admission of guilt, he walked free. And that's what we see in the legal system. And, we also look at a lot of policing. A lot of our women have been raped and have experienced harm from police forces. And, it's something that's never brought up, never talked about, and yet they always want to add more police to our communities. They always talk about the need for more policing, and that's not what we need when they are part of the problem. And, I'm so glad that this conversation is starting to take more root, especially in regards to police brutality, because, people are starting to really understand that it's so pervasive. It's not just violence towards Black people. It's not just violence towards Indigenous people. It's violence towards everyone. You see this at the protests now, that everyone is subject to abuse. And, it's pulled back a veil that it's not just it's not just a few bad apples. It's the whole tree that's rotten. And that's what needs to go.
Jen, I'm going to let you weigh in on this California bill, the introduction of it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we need more data, we need more cooperation, but we don't need more police. We don't need more cops. In Minnesota, Native girls are incarcerated at 18 times the rate of white girls. Native women get killed all the time when cops get called in just for a mental health wellness check. We don't need more cops. And I'm going to share a very personal story as well to sort of show where, like, the system, keeping the system in place is not the answer. I myself am a survivor of a lot of sexual assault and domestic violence. And in February of 2018, I was raped while I was on a date with someone. He was an Indigenous man, and it went on for 7.5 hours. I was 2.5 months out of back surgery, so I really couldn't fight back. I was very clearly prey for him. And part of the reason I didn't call the police sooner is because I was afraid to have the cops come to my home, because survivors get arrested all the time. Not to mention, on top of the fact that Native people actually per capita have the highest rates of murder by police, but about 50% of people killed by the cops also have disabilities. I've got a lot of things going on here that make me terrified to go to the police and go to the system. It was after I found out after the fact when he was arrested that, he lied to me about his name, his age, how long he lived in DC. He had a pretty extensive record with multiple domestic violence charges and base arrests. And I decided at that point, you know what, I'll testify if that's what it takes. And it has. It's been over 2 years and I am still fighting this in the legal system. I had to go through a trial in criminal court and in civil court. Even though I was raped, because he was not charged with rape, I did not get the benefit of the DC rape shield laws. And so in both trials, I was just painted as a whore who got what she deserved. They, of course, tried to say I'm a liar. In the criminal trial, the attorney also tried to make the argument that because I'm disabled, I'm just feeble-minded and don't know what happened, which is a really interesting legal argument, because if that was the case, then I can't consent anyway, so it's still rape. In the civil trial, which was in December, I was trying to get my civil protective order extended because DC, in their just fucked up way, they won't give you a protective order past a year, so you have to keep coming back to court. And so we had to go to trial, and his defense attorney actually said that I was trying to get my civil protective order extended to further my career. This is part of the reason why I've not been writing and talking about murdered and missing and sexual assault and domestic violence, because this shit has been thrown against me when I've been on the stand. And he appealed the criminal conviction. It was a misdemeanor domestic violence simple assault. That's all he got for what he did to me. He did serve some time. He served about 5 weeks. And he, was on probation and such. But in the process of this, the man had also been arrested 3 other times for assaulting 3 other women. And the system just kept letting him walk. So even when, what Johnny said, if it's a BIPOC offender, we're more likely to see some kind of justice in the courts. But even then, let's be real, my life has 0 value to the United States. And the fact that, I live in DC, it's not a state, so it's the AUSA's office. So it's a federal U.S. attorneys that file these claims and whatnot. They don't give a damn about me. They don't give a damn about my life. And I've seen that over and over and over again in the system. And, he's appealed the criminal conviction, and that finally had made its way in front of the appellate judges. But now with the COVID pandemic, all the courts are closed. So I have no idea when they'll make a decision on that. If they overturn the conviction, then I have to decide if I'm willing to go through a 3rd trial. And I have no doubt that if I have to do another trial, that everything I'm saying now will probably be used against me in court. So fuck the cops, man. Fuck the government. Fuck the criminal injustice system. Only 3% of rapists even spend a night in jail. And while I believe in traditional justice for issues of sexual assault and domestic violence, I don't think jails is the answer. Having jails and prison has not kept me from being raped. It's not kept me from being beaten and almost murdered. That night I called the police because I screamed and screamed, and none of my neighbors would come help me. It was really when it reached the point that I thought I might be the next missing and murdered. That's when I finally caved and called the cops. And I have watched the system bend over backwards for him time and time again, and just paint me as, feeble-minded and a liar and a whore. And, I'm using, my rape story to further my career. This is not furthering my career. It's not, and with this case hanging over my head for years, forget about ever going through any process of healing. I don't get to heal because this is always hanging over my head, so I want people to stand up and realize what's happening to us. I want them to recognize it. And I want them to recognize all of the other ways in which marginalized people suffer sexual assault. The CDC did a study in, I believe, 2005 that found that 61.1% of bi women had been assaulted by a partner. And that number was almost twice as high as that for straight women. And I think it was in the 40th percentile for lesbians. There are just certain groups of women that are going to be more likely abused. And we are the women, we are the people that the system is not there for.
Jen, I am so sorry that that happened to you. I'm sorry that that asshole hurt you, and I'm sorry that the criminal injustice system re-traumatized you. I truly am. And Johnny, I'm very sorry about what happened to your aunt. Would you say her name for us?
Linda Zotai.
Ladies, that was very deep. I'm gonna, well, maybe we can end on a I won't say a happy note, but something that might make you smile. We're going to show a video, something that happened in Arizona now. Mind you, I have no context for this video. I don't know what happened before the person started recording, but I do know what happened as the recording continued on. A Native woman was told by a white woman to go back to Mexico.
Okay.
And the Native woman, she let her hands do the talking. Let's take a look.
We're not serving you.
Hold on, guys. Okay.
We do not serve you. Do not speak like
Excuse me,
that.
but you did say that she needs to go back to her country. What kind
This
of,
is my country.
what is that?
Originally, Native Americans are
Excuse
from
me,
this
this is what
country.
this whole world-
White people are not from this country. Don't serve her.
Yeah, you do not serve
Don't
her.
serve her
She is
racist
not-
ass.
she is not-
You don't tell. No. Continue serving.
Black
Continue
Lives Matter,
serving.
bitch. You need to leave. You're not a part of this. You need to leave. You're not a part of this. No.
Racist.
No, you do not
You
come in
just
here and use the F word and swear and call me a B-I-T-C-H.
I've never even
I said she is, and
I've
you're not a
never
part
even
of
said
it.
that word.
So
You're
you
making
get out of
stuff
here.
up now.
I know. I said she is, and that's why she's leaving. So you will leave too.
No.
She owns the country.
This is going all on the internet. You don't know who I am. You told her to go back to her country where she's from.
I did not even be with her. That's assault. You
Yeah.
guys know that, right?
Yeah.
Where were you born? Where were you born? Where were you born, bitch? I was born in America, bitch. Where are your ancestors from? They're not from this country. You're going back to Mexico. Bitch, you better go back to where you're from.
You just walked into her. Excuse me?
Bitch, you just touched me. Oh my God.
Yeah, you deserved it.
Oh my God.
In my opinion. Yeah, you pushed her and she smacked you. That was self-defense on her part.
Oh, she grabbed me.
Nope.
Please.
Now, I don't always advocate violence. But if you are going to smack her, at least smack her hard enough to knock the glasses off her face. She hit her with the...
That did make me smile. Thank you.
I'm glad it
Yeah.
did. I'm glad it
Yeah.
did. Ladies, I you guys have to come back like soon. I really want us to dig into these conversations a lot more. And, you know, Johnny and Jen and Desiree, you guys have all shared deeply, deeply personal experiences with our audience. And I mean, this shit happens to people every day. And people who are not Native, Black people, white people, Asian people, Latinx people, y'all need to be aware of these things. I know all of our respective groups have their own struggles, but there's no comparison to what has happened to the Native people of this continent. That goes for you too, Canada. We're talking to y'all too, especially to y'all. And if you guys would have us, we would love to have you back on so we can get into a lot of these issues a lot more and bring to the forefront stuff that is impacting people in Indian country that has been going on for now hundreds of years and is still happening in 2020. You guys had the comments on fire. Desiree, you blew everybody's mind with blood quantum. People are like, what the fuck, blood quantum? Never even heard of it. Like, so parts of your experience are educating the rest of us. And if you would be so generous with your time and with yourselves to come back on and we can have more of these kinds of talks, because I learned a lot today and I can't convey the strength that I see in all three of you and how much I am in admiration of it. So thank you all three for joining us today.
Wado, thank you for having us back. And I'm happy to keep coming back. I know we're not always talking about fun things here, but it's still nice to see all three of you. And I know we've got a big audience out there, but it also feels very intimate. Like we're just sitting in my living room chatting with like a coffee or something. It's nice.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we've been speaking to Jen Deerenwater. She is a journalist, organizer, and founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism. Desiree Kane is a Miwok journalist, and she's also a community organizer out in California. And Johnny J, y'all see her, originally from Oklahoma, now she's in Cali. Wave to the people, baby. There we go, journalist and community builder. Again, such a pleasure to have all three of you on with us, joining us for First Nation Friday here on Stir Crazy. Thanks again, ladies. And thank you all, everyone that's watching. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, critiques, we'd love to hear it in our email, stircrazy@therealnews.com. I'm Kim Brown. Don't forget, the Rona is still out there, okay? COVID-19 is still very much jumping on people, folks. So I don't care what phase of reopening your state is in. You need to wash your hands all the time. Wear your masks. I don't care what the other people are saying. The Rona is still out there very much. So please have a safe weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. See ya.